All right. So we've got a few items in the backlog. I kind of jumped the queue a little bit, and I added an entry for today to talk around CNCF. But I'm happy to open it up if there's any other topics that people would like to discuss beforehand.
The item I have in there in the backlog, I'll leave that till at least after Kuadrant, maybe till after the POC. The other items there from Craig and then Dee and Adam. So any of you guys want to jump in with those?
Sure. Yep. That would be the estimated cost of complexity of the root selectors, right? Right. I don't know if we discussed any of that in the last meeting, because I've been talking about that with some people since last week, so I don't really remember. But basically, we spotted that due to the new common expression language validation rules added to those gateway API types we depend on, namely the ones in the HP root. Once we import those types into our API, either inside of the auth policy or the rate limit policy, because those types are used currently in what can be effectively an unlimited list of definitions, right? So in the case of rate limit policy, you can, as of today, declare as many limit definitions as you want inside the rate limit policy, where each limit definition can have a set of so-called root selectors, which in turn depends on those types from Gateway API. The added up complexity estimated for the entire custom resource, the rate limit policy custom resource, exceeds the threshold imposed by the cluster API server, right? Forcing us, if we want to continue on using those types and importing those types directly from the Gateway API packages, to also set a limit on the number of definitions we allow inside of our policy. So in the case of the rate limit policy, we would need to impose a limit of the maximum number of limit definitions allowed inside of rate limit policy. In the case of the auth policy, we would have to set a limit of the maximum number of authentication definitions, metadata definitions, and so on for each one of the phases of the auth policy. Well, and that's what Adam, who first spotted this issue, did in his tests for supporting Gateway API v1. But it doesn't have necessarily to be like that, right? So that is probably the easiest and quickest thing to do, just to set a limit. The limit, I have to say, is quite tight due to the thresholds. But alternatively, what we could do is, instead of continuing on importing those types, we could copy those types and redefine them inside of the Kuadrant namespace, right? So they would be Kuadrant types defined in this case, probably either in the Kuadrant operator code base or soon in the future inside of the Gateway API machinery. And the reason why it kind of makes sense copying, or it may make sense copying those types to our code base instead of continuing importing those from Gateway API, is that effectively we do not care about the complexity of that, right? Because in fact, we do not need to validate those. Provided that those need to map one-to-one to declarations inside of the target network resource, in this case, an HP root, right? That is up for the HP root to validate. So when one creates an HP root using those HP root rules or HP root matches with all those validations, it's when the Kube API server will validate the resource. Whereas in the Kuadrant custom resource, we don't need to revalidate those, right? If they are not valid, it would just not match an existing HP root, and our a custom resource will be invalid, but for a different reason. It will be invalid not because of those validation rules, but because it does not match an one-to-one to an existing rule inside of the target network resource. So that is another option. And this is what we're bringing up for discussion here today. Should we continue on in importing the types from Gateway API package, or should we redeclare those types inside of our own code base to work around the problem of the limitation and get back to the current state, actually, which is not having a limit of the maximum number of limit definitions and can have an on rate limit definition, or if we do want to set a limit, it does not have to be backed or anyhow related to that validation from Gateway API. We can come up with our own maximum number of limits that we consider reasonable inside of our own resource. Yep, Thomas.
It's also related to the proposal of adding names, no? Like there's also a possible solution, at least in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Indeed, yeah, and indeed that is the link that we have there in the document, right? Because the reason why we have those root selectors and the way we define that API is because that is probably the most straightforward way of linking a portion of your policy to the exact section inside of an HP root that you want to target, right? You want that particular root to apply. And because we don't have the section name or an equivalent to the section name or a name of the HP root supported in the Gateway API corresponding type. Otherwise, instead of duplicating those types inside of our own API, we would probably replace that with just a list of strings, list of names of sections inside of the target resource that you want that particular rule to apply. So we raised that in the Gateway API community call last week. We explained that that has been an issue to us, and why we believe that might also be yet another reason to put some effort or give some love, to that issue of adding the name or section name fields to the HP root types. They said, they kind of different opinions there. There are people that are not 100% convinced of having the name field in the HP root rule type, and there are people that are on the complete opposite side. So they practically advised us to try to take the lead on that discussion and try to build some consensus around it. The first thing I do regarding that, the proposal of having the name field in the HP route rule, was reaching out again to the Istio team, who were the first one proposing the issue in the first place. And they said they would still support it. They actually still recommend in the counterpart of that resource that exists in the Istio world, which is the virtual service. They do recommend people to naming their roots, even though it's an optional field. And they would do just the same for the Gateway API, right? They would recommend users of Gateway API with Istio being the implementation behind to also name each individual rule they declare inside of an HP route rule. And they also pointed me to 2 more people to reach out to next week after KubeCon. They are all active in the Gamma group of Gateway API. In the sense of trying to build that consensus that we have to push for having those new fields. But that is for the future, right? Maybe next version of Gateway API, we get that accepted, and we would have those fields to rely on and to redefine our own API based on that. But in the meantime, we need to decide what to do with the existing root selector that we have. Thoughts, I know Alex, sorry to push you under the bus, Alex, but I know you may have an opinion on this one. Adam knows about this stuff more than anybody else because he was the one actually touching the code about that. So please speak up if you have any thoughts or any questions on this. Okay, we can continue this conversation offline in a way. Probably capture this in an issue inside of the Kuadrant organization. Maybe it could be the form of an RFC or something simpler. I don't know. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I just want to add that like there's two things. Well, there's almost three phases to this, right? What is it? I guess on long term, we hope that like the name section that we can like point to the actual proper section using a name. That's the best way of doing this because it decouples your rate limit policy or whatever, right? That points to a route from the actual definition, right? The HTTP route is the one that defines what the route is, and then you attach a policy and you specify exactly which part. So that's a long-term thing, as Guy said. But I guess what I care most about right now is like the very short-term one, which is we want to release Kuadrant with Gateway API v10 support, right? And so we have two ways of doing that. And just to be clear about what the implications are, is that if we just limit the amount of those things in there, you may have an issue being able to either auth or limit certain things in the way you would want to, right? Because you're limited by one policy, and then what can you put in there? So, yeah, I guess how do we want to go to market, like release the Gateway API? So that's one. There is the fix from Adam that just addresses it, and then we can move on, but then limits the user. Or do we copy those types or whatever and do something else? Sorry if I repeated the obvious or whatever, but I just wanted to sort of timeline this.
No, not at all. I think that's very, very good that you pointed out, Alex. Indeed, that has to do with supporting V1 and how we want to support V1. What I would like to add is it doesn't even have to be V1, right? In fact, we would have this problem with V08 already. Currently, we have in the Kuadrant operator repo, we are dependent on 062. We could go one more version, 070, without hitting the issue. But starting from 08, we already have those cell validations in the HP root type. So we would have to deal with it anyway. And only so people get an idea of yet other alternatives in the long term that we could have, let's say, in case the section name does not, it does not get accepted, right, for any reason. Because there are people from the Gateway API team that they believe that we should not do that, right? And what they would recommend instead would be for a different design of our API and allowing, for example, multiple policies targeting the same network resource, or recommending our users to break their HP routes into multiple HP routes, right? Where they would only have a handful of rules inside of each HP route, and therefore also create multiple policies, right? I think that kind of it is kind of doable for the rate limit policy, I guess, but it raises other problems for the auth policy. So anyway, only so you get in perspective here that there are other options for the future, depending on how this conversation around the section name goes. Yeah, Paul?
Perhaps an obvious question, given I'm missing some context here, but how likely is it that end users are going to encounter this issue? I guess I'm wondering really in terms of priority, how much of a priority is this for us to try and address this as quickly as possible, or could we afford to maybe have it there and be aware of it, but until such time as end users start encountering it, then our hands will be forced to try and react?
Right. Thinking short term, if we do go the route of the path of having a limit on the number of limit definitions, sorry for overloading the terms here, inside of a rate limit policy, that limit we know already would be 14, meaning a user would not be able to define to declare more than 14 limit definitions inside of a rate limit policy, which I personally consider too few, right? Too harsh of a limit. And similarly to the auth policy as well. Whereas if we go the path of redefine or copying those types inside of our code base, we virtually break away from that limitation, and we can define our own limit for the number of definitions that can be put there. So answering your question, if we go the route of having the limit, users will not be able to define more than 14, and that would be right away. Without doing anything, we cannot even install the CRD.
And the downside to implementing our own limits or setting our own limits is that we're moving away from the standard implementation. Is that right? Or what's the downside to us working around this to enforce our own limits?
I mean, it's increase the level of maintainability, I would say, right? Because we need to keep effectively a copy of those types. And while Gateway API evolves, right, in the definition of those types throughout the multiple versions, we need to, until we have the section name, we would have to replicate those changes in our own API. Yeah, I have Alex and Thomas.
Yeah, let me add something to this. So since this is 1.0, we wouldn't necessarily need to follow what they do, right? Because what we need is a way for people to be specific enough to tell us which HTTP route like match they're targeting on the other side, right? So let's say if they add a new, because they cannot change things, right? So they would possibly add a new thing or whatever. It may be a problem, but it may also not be a problem, right? If you can be specific enough in the rate limit policy to tell us exactly what you're targeting on the HTTP route resource, then you're good, right? So, yeah, so he's not wrong in what he says, but we only use that to know what exactly, like we don't force the user to exactly replicate what he has on their HTTP route, right? It's enough so that we can identify one, and to be precise, the exact one. But yeah, so just, but he's nonetheless right? There is overhead in maintaining this thing over time.
Maybe, like, I think Paul's point is valid in the sense that we might think it's not enough, but maybe that's not an issue. Yeah, I mean, we should know that it's not enough. Like, for example, operations, 3-scale operations, how many rate limiting rules do they use? Of course, they don't use Gateway. They don't use the whole thing, but I don't know if that's true. The other thing I wanted to say was, is it also true that because that name field, even if it comes, it would be an optional field? I don't think that's going to be, that will be an optional field. So that means that not everybody will use it. Do we really want to then say to people, well, if you want to use Kuadrant, you have to use it? Like, so is that name field actually not a solution? Maybe. I mean, it's not going to solve it because we don't want to limit ourselves so much. Question mark, Alex.
All right, let me get my take on this. So I don't think we would want to force them, and I don't think we would even be in a position to actually do that anymore, modular by this, right? So, I mean, yes, we could, right? Because we're not GA or on any of our APIs, but I think it would be not nice to our existing users, right? So if you think about somebody using that, then wanting to upgrade, they would need to go and, like, I don't think that's nice of us if we do that. That being said, I would highly recommend that they do use the section name, because right now what we're asking of them is a partial duplication of definition of things, and that's very brittle, right? So if somebody now changes, do I even want to open that door? But as I said, right, there needs to be like partial replication of exactly what we're matching on the other side on our policy. Now you change that HTTP route in a way, and the thing you targeted all of a sudden is not matched by this part of the policy definition that used to map it, but then maps to another one, right? So it can fire back big time what we're doing as well. So
Right.
honestly, I
get
think the
that.
naming thing is really just name the thing and target the thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, but we cannot count on it for simplifying our complexity. Is my point. Like there could still be people not using it, so
Yes.
it's not going to solve the problem per definition.
Yeah, and yes, we could deprecate the other things, say don't use it, because you could, like, I think this would all be nice, but I wouldn't see a world where we go, oh no, that's not, well, let's say in the foreseeable future, when we go, like, we remove this thing, once we go supporting that, like, there's no way we can turn our back on the users anyways. So
Well,
yes, it stay there, but yeah.
Yes, I would say it's even stronger. Right? I mean, if it's an optional field in Gateway API, then it cannot suddenly become a non-optional field in Kuadrant. I mean, that doesn't feel like somebody playing nice with an API that we say we support.
Well, I don't think that would be horrible, right? Because when you think about it, like, you probably first have your HTTP routes, then you come and you want to add the rate limit policy to it, and then Kuadrant tells you, oh, you need to name the exact thing that you're targeting there, other than you possibly by then targeting the entire HTTP route definition, in which case it'd be relevant. And then you need to change your, actually, let me play devil's advocate then. Based on the rationale that you have right now, what you're saying is you want to see the types duplicated. Because today, using the same rationale, you don't want to have people change their HTTP routes, which I think is what I'm hearing you say. But today, that would be the case because of the limit that we impose on the policies. Sorry, I sort of played an evil trick there, but by the same logic, then you just solved our problem.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that maybe the real solution is us copying the whole thing in some sort of facade that we don't have to. It's no longer a problem. Then we can have an internal system with names. I mean, I'm not sure if that makes sense, but one of the two options that Guy was pointing to, what we can do, like we can either put limits there, or we can basically put that complexity in our own system, right?
Well, what I was thinking is either with the limits or we copy the gateway API types as is, right? I was not thinking on redefining those types, like creating wrappers for gateway API objects. That was not what I had in mind, right? It was, okay. Yeah. And another thing here is that if we decide to import those types, that will not be the first time we did it. Okay, so in the Kuadrant operator, we already have types that we imported from other packages, because we could not just import the package itself, and those are the ones from Maestra. So we had this issue in the past that, for different reasons, right, it has to do with the dependencies that we would be importing together into our code base. We had to copy the types. So we even have a home for those files in case we want to bring them from Gateway API. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, so again, just back to my original point, how pressing is this, right? It doesn't sound like there's a nice solution here right now, and that the changes aren't being implemented on the Gateway API side, but also we're not entirely keen on copying things over on our side to set new limits. So again, as I've mentioned, do we just sit tight and hope things develop on the Gateway API side and wait until we get validation or some sort of feedback from end users saying that this is a genuine problem, And at that point, perhaps we could look at copying things over and making changes on our side. But I'm just wondering, is there a need to act on this right now, or do we kind of sit and see how things play out?
Effectively, if we do not do anything, that blocks moving to Gateway API v1 in our code base. So we are stuck at 0.7 tops.
Yeah,
Okay,
but the cheap way to fix it is just to add the limits, right?
Yeah, that works.
And then wait for somebody to tell us, well, that sucks, and then we move on. I mean, that's the least amount of work, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I suppose, yes. Mainly because it's done already, right? Adam did us the favor of implementing those limits already, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say, I think Paul has a point there, right? I think because Adam did the work, because I think in terms of work, it is just different work. I don't think it's really a whole lot more or a lot less. But we can absolutely do that. Go for the next release, supporting Gateway API 1.0 with those limits in place. Document those clearly, and then hold on to our butts, hoping that we get the section name coming in. If that comes, then that is sort of the ultimate fix for us. If that never comes, then we can reopen that discussion. And then if a user comes around, honestly, I'm mostly scared, just to be clear, rate limit, for those who knows about limitador, a rate limit policy has this concept of the time windows in it, right? So it's not like a limit as limitador understands it, where per second, per minute, per hour, per day, blah, 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 are all different. So that's kind of the good news, because otherwise 14 is definitely not enough. There's nothing you can do with that. But I think in this case, for basic use cases, it is probably fine. I'm mostly scared about auth, to be honest. That's the one that concerns me most. And then see if it happens, right? And then if somebody complains, he takes the time to open an issue and say, how am I supposed to even work with that limit? Then we can re-wonder. Sorry, Thomas.
No, just on the subject of moving that naming along, I would not wait too long with doing a draft pull request and discuss around that, because just having a discussion without any example of the actual how it should be, how that API what should be added, and of course it's very simple, but still I would say don't wait too long. I mean, there will always be people against it, probably.
You mean in Gateway API, right?
Yes.
There was already a pull request opened, basically doing all the work, but it was closed because we did not. Yeah, because we did not have the consensus. It's only a matter of rebasing that, making sure it's using the latest version, but that's it. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, just on my side, I think if we got folks or end users giving us feedback stating that this is an issue, I think that's a good place for us to be, right? Because it means that they're using it in the first place, right? And at that point we can react to it. So look, without having a huge amount of context or fully understanding the issue as such, it sounds to me like we could just wait. Now, Guy, you'd mentioned the fact that it blocks us from going to V1. Does it actually block us where the only route that we have is to copy things over and make changes on our side in order to onboard to V1? Or are we saying that by going to V1, we just have to accept the limitation that's in place?
Yeah, the letter, yeah.
Okay. Well, just my personal view then would be just accept the limitation. And if someone bangs on the door, well, I think that's a good thing, right? Because it means someone's actually out there using it. And it sounds like we already have a fix in place, so we could react to it quickly if needed.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Of course, with the added risk that not everybody who stumbles upon something will actually say something, right? So for any one message that you get, there's maybe 99 people who actually had the issue and left the project. So we have to be careful with that too.
And besides that one that comes raising the issue will probably come with some disappointment, right? How do I fix this, and how do I overcome this limitation? Maybe we are lucky and we can find a workaround. Yeah.
But I guess just on that as well is that the limitation isn't being imposed by ourselves. And while it's not a blame game, I think it's a legitimate excuse to say that this is something that's implemented in Gateway API today. And by the way, we have discussed alternatives and we can look to implement something if needed.
Sorry, Paul, that is wrong. It's based on decisions that are purely relying on us that we took. That's a design decision. We took the easy route, which is importing the types, which means you iterate the cell validation along that lines. So the blame is absolutely on us. There's no blaming on anybody else, sadly enough. I love the blaming, so I'm all for it.
But the limitation isn't being enforced by us, right? The limitation is something that's in Gateway API.
Yes.
But we hit it.
This is splitting hair, but you're correct. But just because of us being, because of the way that we do things. So we could absolutely work around that, right? In many ways, by the way.
Well, why don't we agree on moving on then with the limit, so we can, Adam can finish the work on trying out view one. Maybe we can merge that, right? And soon enough, we can revisit and think, do we really want to release this way, or it's worth the effort of copying the types inside of our code base?
Yeah,
good.
A GitHub issue is still a good idea, I think.
Okay, make sure to open one. Okay, thanks. So I guess I'm handing over back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, so just this line item is in relation to CNCF and our application around that. So we had a conversation some weeks ago with some CNCF representatives internally in Red Hat, and we presented the Kuadrant project, and overall I think it was received positively. And the question was asked whether we want to go, or whether we want to submit an application to go to the sandbox, or potentially jump the sandbox and go straight into incubation. As I understand it, the barrier for entry is significantly higher for incubation. And I think the main thing that we need to be aware of in order to get some sort of acceptance to be considered for incubation is that we need to have 3 external adopters, where we would need to highlight or nominate 3 external contributors outside of our immediate group who are actively using the project today and who are willing to stand up and have a private interview with the representative from CNCF, as I understand it, to say, yes, this is something we're actively using today. So I know, Guy, you've been doing a lot of good work where you've been following up with folks, and I know we have gotten some success in that area and we've gotten some feedback, but I'm not sure if we'll stretch as far as 3 references at this point. And I guess in my head today, what I'm thinking is, well, to get into CNCF Sandbox today, I don't think there's much additional work, at least from a technical perspective, to get accepted into CNCF Sandbox as it stands today. For me, I would see it as a building block potentially to trying to build out our community. If we look to go for incubation, we could succeed eventually, but my fear is that it would take significantly longer to get to that point, to get accepted. And therefore we run the risk, or there's going to be a large period of time where perhaps we're not necessarily getting our names out there, or our names aren't necessarily there on the map and on the website. So for me, purely from a visibility standpoint, I think it looks good to be associated or a part of the CNCF, regardless of whether you're sandbox or incubation. I think it'd be a good stepping stone then for us to try and build out our community engagement adoption strategy. So I guess I just wanted to throw it out to this group to get people's thoughts on what we think we should do. And based on the outcome there, we'll then proceed and give some feedback to the folks we've been talking to with respect to this application. Alex.
Yeah, I would echo what David just said, but I guess one follow-up question to that is, like, is there any downside of first going to a sandbox and then trying to be promoted to incubation?
Not that I'm aware of. I believe the projects in the past have moved up the ranks relatively quickly. Obviously, you need to meet their criteria. But as I understand it from reading online, it sounds like the barrier to entry for Sandbox has been reduced, and therefore there's been a a lot of projects accepted to it, and the barrier for entry into incubation is significantly higher now. But I don't see any downside. I believe once we get to sandbox, we could immediately submit an application about incubation if we felt we were ready.
Yeah, and what people are saying in the chat is certainly my feeling. Just get the ball rolling, and baby steps, one step after another. Sounds really good to me.
Yeah, that was my view as well. But I just wanted to throw it out there. Guy, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Well, you said it yourself, right? So either we meet the requirements or we do not meet the requirements, right? If we do not meet the requirements for the incubation, there is no point on trying something that we know is it's not going to be accepted. But other than that, I wonder if I'm not mistaken, and honestly, I'm not sure about that. But in CNCF, you do not go only upwards in the ladder, right? From sandbox into incubation, but sometimes they also drop project from the list, right? So with that in mind, is there any difference between starting directly in incubation versus first on sandbox? Is there any risk that we start in sandbox, we do not have enough, representativity or strength, to keep on moving upwards in the ladder? Does it increase the chances of being dropped as a project if we do not get, those 3 references in a matter of, I don't know, a few months?
So based on the documentation I've been reading, there is an annual review done by the TOC to see if a project is still relevant or whether their participation in CNCF makes sense. But I don't think it's a case that, oh, you've been in sandbox for a long period of time now and you have until this date to get to incubation or you drop out. I don't think that's the case. As long as there's a legitimate reason and that the project is still active, I think it's fine if we just sat in sandbox for a period of time. The other thing I would say as well is that in terms of timeframes, it sounds like things move relatively slow. So the feedback that we got from some of the CNCF folks was, even if we wanted to go straight to sandbox, which we feel today we could be in a strong position to do, I believe the next time that we could potentially be accepted will be April next year, April 2024. I think March is the window that was open, but because KubeCon is happening, I think they said that'll get pushed back to April. So even just to get to sandbox today, we're still talking 6 months time before we'd even reach that milestone. Sorry, I'm not sure who had their hands up first, Thomas or Alex.
Alex, but I'm just going to skip. Sorry, like I'm just reacting directly on what you said. Sorry, it's like that was one of their motivations to suggest that that we skip the sandbox, because they said like, well, it takes so long before you can apply anyway. Maybe by that time you're ready to skip sandbox, and that might be valid. I mean, if we have 2 more external users by
Right.
February.
So since I'm on first, I'm just going to talk over Thomas because he's shorter than me, so I can do that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, do we need to answer that question today then? Or when do we need to get the application in? Because if we're talking about April, then maybe we should have the discussion in March. And based on that, decide which of the 2 checkbox we check or whatever we do. Or do we need to enter a pipeline like in the next few days, weeks?
That's a good question, Alex, and that's one I can put to the CNCF folks and get their feedback on. But I mean, even if we sat tight, do we feel like we could be of course we could be in a better position because things are moving forward, but do we feel like it's not even just getting 3 adopters and saying, hey, here's their pull request, this validates it. It's to have 3 people who are willing to go on record to have a private interview with someone from CNCF. So you could have maybe 10 people contributing externally from this group, but none of them might be willing to go on record.
On record or with the CNCF? Because to me, that means different things, right? So
yeah,
it's a private thing, right? It doesn't need to be advertised like all over the world. Well, then, but back again, it doesn't really change my perspective, right? It's like, let's move forward, like with the project, like Gateway API 1.0. I think that's going to be like hopefully a big enabler for people. Maybe I should bring this up at some point here as well, but I started looking, there are ways for us to get WASM plugins inside GKE running. So maybe we could have add support for that, like out of the box. which again lowers the bar to entry for people to use the thing and hopefully then contribute as well. And then from there, see, like, back again to a question, but it's okay, you don't have an answer, I get that. But, you know, see maybe in March, and then, you know, get ready for, do whatever we can on our side to be ready to do the application, and then decides in what basket we drop the application form in, depending on where we are in March. But if you tell me, no, we need to like move forward now with them, then I think I would say again what people have said in the chat, right? I would go sandbox, sounds safe enough, and then iterate.
Yep, I think that's a fair summary. So as I said, I'll take an action, and hopefully we can get an answer the next couple of days. KubeCon is on this week, so the folks in CNCF may be busy, but hopefully we can get an answer from them relatively quickly.
Yeah, a quick word on either on record, not on record. Yeah, you're right, Alex. They do not have to go public about that. At the same time, there's some debate about what that really means, because technically, the CNCF committee members, which are the decision makers here, they are not under any confidentiality agreement. So effectively, the word can spread, right? So it's not like it's guaranteed that people will not know that you're using that technology. In fact, even ourselves, right? We could go in at a bar and say, you know what, that company X, or I should not say X because Elon Musk completely ruined that to everybody, but company Y is using Kuadrant, right? Nothing prevents me from saying that as of today. And the same for them. If at the very least, whatever project company that agrees on becoming a reference for us to CNCF should be aware that that is a possibility that could happen.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm also just thinking as well with respect to getting external contributors. It's really down to us to try and get our names out there as best we can. And I know, Guy, you've put yourself forward for a CNCF Barcelona sponsored event. And there's also a separate event as well that you and maybe some others might be involved in too. So I think the more conferences we try to submit proposals for and try and get our names out there, then it puts us in the strongest chance, or it gives us the strongest chance to try and get some external contributors in. And as Alex said, let's just see what the timelines are. If the timelines are very short when you submit an application soon, then perhaps the answer just goes straight to Sandbox, but let's wait and see.
So I guess one of the best action items for us on this one would be, I mean, everybody can do that, right? We can try to tell more about Kuadrant to people and convince them to try it. And if anybody, you know, is happy with it and say, hey, you know what, if it works for you, we do need your help. So if you can become reference. Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, just had an idea. Maybe I should not say this in a recorded call, but like, so what we did with getting email addresses, potential email addresses through people helping out with the code, making commits. Could we do the same with people that start? Because I just saw you can just see all the GitHub names from all the people that start all the repositories, and some of them are from external companies. Is there a way to figure out how to reach out to those people and ask? Or is that impossible?
No, there's definitely a way, right? I don't know about data privacy aspects here, right? So how far we can go? Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well,
but that would be that would be a different effort, right? Definitely valid to explore more. But at the same time, I personally believe that speaking more in the meetups, conferences, and even unofficially to people, I think that has some power, right? To friends, and sometimes we find people that they are interested in being more vocal about what they are doing, right? So maybe they want to run their own meetups, their own talks, and say, you know what, we tried that at our company and it worked for us, right? So that is the kind of thing that I think can really help us here.
Okay, cool. So as I said, I'll take an action item and then we can revisit this conversation in a future community call. Okay, is there anything else from the backlog that people would like to discuss, or are we happy to wrap it up here?
Well, we have one from David. I don't know how long he needs for that one. I also had another one which I could try to squeeze in here, but I'm also happy to postpone it to next week if no
Yeah,
problem
I'll
at all.
postpone as well. Yeah. Wait till after KubeCon or after the POC when we can put a bit more focus on the one I put in.
Okay, I guess we can wrap up there then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.